Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the OSINT Curious Podcast Webcast. I am one of your hosts this week. I'm Micah Hoffman, and I am joined by some amazing OSINT Curious members and a special guest this week. But before we get into an interview with our guest, let's introduce ourselves. I've already told who I am. Nix, do you want to go ahead and tell me who you are?
Hi everyone, I'm Steve, better known as Nix. You can find me on Twitter at NixIntel, and I'm really looking forward to being back on the webcast this evening. I'll spin the wheel and point it at Gumshoe. Introduce yourself to us, Gumshoe.
Hey everybody, I'm John TerBush. You can find me on Twitter at the Gumshoe with 2 O's. And let's take it over to Matthias.
Hey everybody, this is Matthias, also known as MWOSINT on Twitter, and I'll hand over to Laurent.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. And yeah, I'm straight again from the and sitting in my kitchen today, and I have the honor to introduce our special guest Amine today. So without further ado, let me introduce Amine. So he's a political risk analyst, advising companies on operational risks and security threats, particularly linked to their operations in Africa and the Middle East. He's also the co-founder of Dispatch Diligence. It's a small African Middle East focused research and consulting firm based in Washington, D.C. And he's also currently completing a PhD at King's College London, focused on geopolitics of critical minerals. So he's a super busy guy, and we are very thankful to have him here today. And most recently, Amine, he also conducted some very, very interesting research on the intersection of social media and irregular migration in North Africa, discussing the extraordinary journey of North African irregular migrants through treacherous areas across several South American countries towards the United States. So very, very interesting stuff. And very, very, we are lucky to have you here today. So thank you so much for joining us. I mean,
thank you, Lauren. Thank you, everyone, for having me.
Yeah, so maybe I can start off with the very first question. Tell us about your story. So how did you get into open source intelligence?
Okay. I don't know about you guys, but I am the child of the cyber cafes generation. So late 90s, I was born and raised in Morocco, and we were, internet had just been actually socialized within the population, within the community. It was still very expensive, and the only access that was available to us was actually to go and pay $1 an hour to explore the internet. I'm not that old, but I started early on. And so that really exposed me to the nuts and bolts of the internet. The reason internet was cheaper at night. That was basically the MO. It was cheaper at night, and so we would spend basically the whole night together as a group in someone's garage who would charge us an hour, and we would be exposed to the uncensored internet. And so I was exposed early on to the forums and the chat room, then IRC, Merrick and what have you. It was during that time that I was hacked for the first time. It was during that time that I understood a little bit the anatomy of the internet. So, looking back, when I think about this question, that I would link Amine of today to that specific context specifically. But then, I think one of the really important things about our community is that before being OSINT analysts, we need to be users of the internet. And, we're fundamentally really nerdy about how we interact and we use the internet. And so throughout my whole career, I've been very much interested in understanding how the internet works, using all the Google tricks and what have you. Fast forward to the Arab Spring, 2011, I was very much active on Twitter, a part of this young Arab, community that was looking into understanding how the dimensions of the protests were taking shape. I was also conducting a master's degree at American University in Washington, D.C., and really being part of an interesting community of young intellectuals and academics looking into the dynamics around the Arab Spring and trying to monitor on an ongoing basis dynamics around those processes. And it was during then that I would say built the strong skills in OSINT, understood a little bit the mechanics of Twitter monitoring, being exposed to all the tools, the marketplace tools. And it was during then that I got my first contract because of that experience and understanding of the anatomy of how social protest taps into and uses social networks and what have you, that I really became a professional in OSINT. I can tell you a little bit the details of, beyond that point, but maybe you can have a follow-up question because I don't want to.
I actually have a question. So you brought up a very interesting point about, growing up in the 90s and stuff and that time when, before everything was Googleized, everything was search engine. Do you think that, and this just kind of hit me because I'm looking around the group here thinking, probably most of you grew up in the 90s and early 2000s. Do you think that some of the inquisitiveness that we sometimes pursue is based upon how we had to learn the internet, where we had to go out and find those forums, we had to go find those AIM chats and other things like that? Have you ever thought about that?
I actually thought about it, and I happen to agree with you 100%, because back then we had to go out there and try to find the information. It wasn't centralized. There was no central repository of information that we could go to and actually Google and then find that information. And so around that time, I was very much interested in hip hop, with a couple of years after the murder of a couple of famous rappers and all, the theories around their murders. And it was part of those forums, engaging with fellow users and trying to understand and ask questions and engage with each other, and we would learn from each other. Primarily, it was a crowdsourced type of understanding of how the internet works. We made a lot of mistakes by being exposed because we didn't understand fully security, but I think that's fundamentally how we learn, is by making mistakes and understanding that there are people out there who are not necessarily friends. There are folks who are not necessarily who they claim they are, because there were all sorts of fake identities online. And I think that created the awareness of having to work on our own operational security when we operate online. These terms, OPSEC, OSINT, what have you, came afterwards, but components of that awareness happened quite early on in our careers.
Yeah. Cool. So now, Lorand, I know you have some other things to talk about here with Amine, but Amine, can you just tell us a little bit about your Dispatch Diligence? What is that organization? What does it do?
So Dispatch Diligence is a small consultant-based political risk due diligence firm based in Washington, D.C. We work on a variety of projects, from your standard. I don't know how much I should expand on the field of due diligence, but I'm happy to talk at length about it. But it's really, we put information, at the heart of our type of research, and that's where the OSINT expertise comes into play. We have a variety. We understand the tools of OSINT, and it's really about applying those tools to different issues or different sets of problems. Once you have that foundational understanding of how to use these tools, you can apply them to a variety of problems, from compliance, anti-money laundering, anti-corruption. That's some of the research that we do. That's the nuts and bolts of the diligence space. It's a lot of it is really trying to make sure that companies are doing business with the right people, that they're not actually in breach of any regulatory requirements, that they're not doing business with known corrupt individuals or known members of organized crime or known members of terrorist organizations, folks who've been indicted in any of these terms. So we're trying to create assurances around those business processes and create some trust in between actors that try to do business. But there's also other components like competitive intelligence. Companies were trying to understand a little bit what's the footprint of their competitors, what are the strategies of their competitors, if specific action that's been taken against their interests are actually linked to the interests of their competitors, if the competitor is actually behind specific acts and what have you. The same tools could be used by journalists to understand a little bit. I mean, we've seen actually how over the last few years journalists have expanded the use of OSINT in the way they conduct the investigative work, and that's amazing. And so, go back to dispatch diligence. We're both lucky and cursed because we operate in the United States, where the public record landscape is just humongous. We're lucky.
Sorry, did you say terrible or you said humongous? Okay.
Humongous, because it's a double-edged sword. As an American, you're exposed as well, and so you have to take measures to protect your own privacy and make sure that you're not as exposed as you might be, because it's so easy to be exposed. We can talk about the election season, how many databases out there that actually harvest of our private information. It's all out there for the whole world to see. It's not just for Americans. And so it's something that we need to think about. But we're lucky because it would also allow us to have an understanding of business entities here in the United States, understand their footprint, understand the risk that comes with doing business with these entities. We cannot claim ignorance about entities that are operating here in the United States, unlike in many other parts of the world. I don't know. I mean, I can expand a little more, but please feel free to ask any follow-up questions.
I'm kind of curious about how, like you just said, there's this great difference between perhaps doing an investigation in Morocco or somewhere in North Africa, investigating businesses or corporations. Probably sometimes you have to step outside of that open source intelligence because there just aren't necessarily records there. What are some of the ways that you sort of fuse collection of that information?
So interestingly, I think there has been some effort in trying to create some baseline of understanding on the number of entities, on business entities in a number of countries in North Africa and the Middle East. And so we've seen commercial solutions that basically provide some level of information on entities in Egypt, centralized and what have you, that allows you to apply keyword search and find some information. In Lebanon, which is a very hot spot for a lot of the diligence work because of natural exposure to a number of things, terrorist organizations, corruption, what have you. And so it's not as it used to be 5 years ago. I think that there's been more and more commercial attempts at actually filling that void. When that void cannot be filled, there are professional organizations who do, what's in the industry called discrete inquiries, and so it's not espionage, it's not spying, it's a known process. It's a process that's a link to compliance. What basically do, you use the same tools that journalists use and inquire on the reputation of a specific entity, because these tools are applied primarily in the reputational space. Yeah, go ahead.
Interrupt. Just on that note, because I think a lot of our listeners and some of our listeners, they're very interested in getting into OSINT, finding jobs, because some of them are new to OSINT. So a question to you, like, what can you recommend, to beginners, but also quickly explain what the daily work looks like for a geopolitical risk analyst or working in diligence? That would be really cool.
Of course. Number one, be good at your trade. Practice. If you're young and you have the energy to spend hours in front of a computer, just go for it, do it, because I think that's ultimately the best way to do it. The current time that we live in, we're lucky we have community like OSINT Curious and what have you, that allow for the mainstreaming of best case practices. I know I follow Nick's Intel on Twitter, the very amazing tips that are available that make me a better researcher. And the OSINT community, the OSINT Curious community, these podcasts that expose us to the variety of actors. I did not know that there was an industry that was structured, that operated under this larger name that is OSINT. I was doing OSINT without knowing that OSINT existed, because I was mostly exposed to the French tradition of doing OSINT, which is, in French they call it l'intelligence économique, which actually it's actually for, if there are any French-speaking folks, it provides some really interesting frameworks for folks who work in OSINT, follow and explore. And so I wasn't familiarized with the term OSINT. It was until I think 2013, I took a training in London, Lorand. It was by a known Dutch gentleman, beard guy, who helped mainstream a lot of the concepts. Surprisingly, he also introduced us to Michael Basil, Michael Basil's books. And early on, the first edition, I went in, I bought it, ordered it, practiced it, then consider myself to be part of the OSINT community. All of a sudden, I had a term, and I had an industry, and I could go online and go to Michael Basil's, shout out to Michael for the community that he created online, despite all the challenges that he's faced over the last few years. But I think that's the only way to do it, is to practice, be part of the community, and you're going to be exposed to a variety of things.
No, absolutely. And how about like a day looks like for a geopolitical risk analyst? Like, how do you use OSINT?
Oh, yeah.
You can also touch upon interesting cases or something.
Great. I'll put on my PhD hat here. Political risk is primarily about understanding the environment within which a specific company operates. And so you need to understand the political environment, the social, the economic, but also the actors that are involved in it. OSINT is a fundamental component of political risk. You cannot rely on subject matter experts on 100% of the time. You have to have a capacity to be efficient in the way you find information online, the way you search those corporate registries, the way you find connections between various business entities in countries where your client is interested to invest in. And so having those technical skills, all the technical skills, the whole shebang that we do in OSINT can definitely be applied in the political risk. And it's really about you being how creative you are with the type of products you provide to the clients. I'll give you an example. We had I'll try to, when I can't speak about things, I could use as hypotheticals, and I'm not going to be able to provide any details, but in certain cases, we had, for instance, a high net worth individual artist who was having a major tour in a number of countries, and they were interested in understanding the political risk, the security risk that they were actually stepping into, having an understanding it was right around the time where certain attacks happened in Europe. And so, the way you work in the US is everything is primarily driven by insurance. So they needed to demonstrate to the insurance companies that they were taking the necessary measures to protect themselves and their staff and what have you. So they came to us for a human solution, a way of having contacts on the ground to understand the risks. But we really provided a different solution, said, hey, you don't have to invest in all of this infrastructure. We can provide a team of analysts that monitor your operations on a 24/7 basis, on a continuous basis, looking for both static and dynamic threats to your individual, your operations, the stadiums where you're going to operate, and what have you. And so they bought it. I mean, we went from a different request to something that's very much OSINT focus on a 100% basis. And it was less expensive and more interesting and much more reactionary yeah.
Next.
Yeah, I'm really interested to know, because obviously you've really been doing OSINT for a very long time. Like, how do you see OSINT changing in the future in your line of work? Do you see there'll be a lot more automation? Do you think that all the data we rely on is going to get harder and harder to access? How do you think it will change?
Yeah, great question. We're definitely moving towards automation. The compliance industry that we are part of is seeking ways to create solutions that are automated, that can tap into online resources without necessarily having to rely on analysts that, quite frankly, can be expensive, and so especially at the very fundamental, basic level type of research, you do not need 3 people to conduct a superficial report on an entity in a environment where there's a lot of data like the United States. And so it's at the very fundamental level, there's a lot of automation, a lot of investment in AI and what have you. There's challenges with jurisdictions that use languages other than English and what have you. Like, it's very difficult to create the same type of technology that in say an Arabic speaking country and what have you. And so yeah, I think for the companies that are going to last will be the companies that invest in automation. And in DC, there are a number of companies that have successfully invested in automation. And we don't need to name them, but they're good examples to follow.
So, you mentioned AI, artificial intelligence, and I think that really speaks to the vast amount of data that we many times can find, whether we're looking in social media, whether we're looking just in business records. Places like the Security and Exchange Commission over here in the United States has the Edgar database, which goes back to the 1930s. There are hundreds, if not more, documents that you could have to sort through. So have you experience with AI and this data reduction technique so that the analysts can really focus on the most important things? And do you see more tools and techniques going in that direction?
Yeah, there are, as we speak, there are companies that are trying to resolve this same problem that you're actually raising. Companies that tap into the vast, internet, the public record landscape here in the US, and try to actually make sense out of that information. It remains quite a challenging task because of not only there's a lot of data, but there's no uniformity in how that data is actually stored, and so it creates a headache for all the engineers and what have you. Luckily, I don't know if it's luckily or unluckily, but in an environment like Washington, D.C., there are solutions that are learning from I would say, government solutions to that kind of problem. And so there's a knowledge base that's being mainstreamed within the commercial space to try to apply some of the same solutions to the commercial space. And I don't know if it's successful or not. Certainly, I cannot buy them. It's way too expensive for our company, but it's something for larger companies to actually look into.
So, can you tell us a little bit about your article, the Wired article about the videos and blog posts about people migrating to Europe, right?
Yeah, that's something I discovered as a user again. It's it didn't start as a structured research project. It started as this gentleman consuming videos, social media, and YouTube, and seeing a pattern, and being basically subjected to the magics of YouTube's algorithm, and realize that YouTube is so smart that it can recognize that there is a video in North African dialects that tackles, a specific topic related to migration that is linked to a specific video that was shared before that also tackles similar thing, but it's in the country next door. I think it was really interesting to see how I was exposed to that algorithm, and from that point on, try to understand what's going on. And really, it's really fascinating that in a number of North African countries, there are a number of influencers that dedicate all of their posts to the question of migration. Variety of issues related to migration, not just how to, but also the normal processes, changes in requirements to migrate in the US or in Germany and what have you. And that creates a community that actually ends up like the OSINT community, collectively smarter about migration. You come in.
It's legal and illegal. In the article, you mentioned that this is not just people saying, "Hey, apply for this visa," and all. They're showing you how to hide in certain places in vehicles, right? I mean,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's what's really interests me here is you come in to watch a video because an influencer, because these guys become influencers. They have millions of views. They make money through Google Ads and what have you, and they become influencers. They start merging and creating, like, doing pranks and filming them. And so you come in as a teenager who's interested about a prank, and you stay for a live broadcast and end up being exposed to some very detailed operational information about migration. And that's really interesting. You come in for something completely different, but you leave with extremely actionable intelligence about how to migrate. And that really what interests me about this research is because we haven't really explored the true impact of these dynamics online. And it raises a lot of moral, ethical, legal questions. And I was pleasantly surprised by the transparency of a number of social media platforms and how they engage with these. They understand some of these dynamics, and some of them understand really that, for instance, you cannot bar a refugee from sharing life-saving information online. If you can protect life, you have the moral responsibility to tolerate some level of sharing on your platforms, because it has some benefits to the least empowered communities in the world.
So what was most impactful to you about the user experience, this whole migration community, and the videos that you were seeing? Was it more that these were being shared openly and sought after, and you were kind of caught up in the YouTube algorithm of all of these other things? Or was it more, I know that some of our listeners love looking at pictures, looking at videos, and seeing if they can figure out where this was, or what type of vehicle that was, or when this was, from more of an OSINT imaging perspective. Did you have a certain way that you were looking, or just, it was all interesting?
Yeah, I was looking in the content mostly. Okay. What kind of information was shared, but I was also interested in some of the OSINT stuff about it. So, for instance, there was a little project that fell through, where we were going to map out a little bit the trajectory of some of these migrants across a number of countries in detail, based on some verification techniques, OSINT verification techniques, make sure that we can corroborate the claims that they say there are in somewhere in the Darien forest in Colombia, and make sure that that is actually the case and not somewhere else. And so, there was an OSINT angle to it, but we're faced with some moral dilemmas here. You do not want to make the life of some of the most vulnerable populations even more difficult. And so, although they understand that it's information that they share to the world, and it's shareable and it's out there on these platforms, but you have to deal with those moral dilemmas yourself as a researcher.
Okay, very good.
So Amine, I have one question for you, because you spoke of different OSINT techniques that you're using. So geolocating things, the verification of information, and you also touched upon the whole topic of automation before. So what in OSINT would you like to learn? Would you like to get better at?
Automation. More. I've tried with Python over and over and over again. I'm okay. I'm not great. I wish I had more time to actually spend on actually learning the nuts and bolts of automation, because I can easily say that 50-60% of my day-to-day OSINT work would have been resolved through.
So what do you mean when you say automation? What are you looking at? Collecting tweets, analyzing things from different platforms? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so if I go back to the French tradition of OSINT and what they call la veille stratégique or la veille économique and what have you, which is continuous monitoring on a specific issue. We'd all benefit from some form of a technical solution that would do the work for you. I used a few years ago, a decade ago, RSS, feeds and what have you. And I even used some of, the tools, the commercial tools back then. It was in marketing, because again, maybe we should talk about how these commercial solutions have evolved from a Radian 6 back in early 2010, 11. I was a user of Recorded Future back in 2012, I think. Before it shifted to being a cyber threat monitoring tool, it used to be something that sort of pretends to predict the future by doing some content analysis to the text and identifying future dates and linking them to specific actions. And so those solutions have continuously evolved. But a lot of the components of those solutions, not the full solution, could be resolved by, say, if I were a bit better at Python and some level of automation.
Okay. So you'd be looking to learn more about programming, scripting, or automation can be everything from like if this then that, or Microsoft Power Automate or something like that too. And that's one of the interesting things that I'm seeing in the industry. And I open this up to everybody else is that the tools that we used to have to make, now people are making these frameworks that we can just configure for us, whether it's web scraping, like using ArchiveBox or something, or whether it's doing something like Power Automate or IFT, that now I need to be a user instead of a programmer. And that I really like, because I don't have time to spend hours and hours and hours learning JavaScript harvesting and stuff like that. So,
and the commercial solutions are really expensive, especially here in the US. It's the ones that are available are actually really expensive.
Okay.
I think especially when it comes to web scraping, what Michael was just talking about, is absolutely right. Nowadays you have tools that makes it super easy to scrape with simple Chrome extensions where you just have to click instead of, it's helpful, of course, if you understand basic HTML, jQuery and all that stuff, but there are tools out there that does everything automatically for you.
And we end up buying that commercial solution because of that. We don't use the full spectrum of the tools available within that commercial solution. So you pay the full price for the scraping capability of that solution. And that's economically for a small company is not something that's actually desirable.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, we have run out of time here for the interview. I do want to share out my screen and show you. Gumshoe,
Right.
Did you have something?
I have an important question that seems to be covered.
Go ahead.
How you got into OSINT, investigating 90s hip hop beefs. Are you an East Coast or West Coast guy?
Man. I'm a West Coast guy. I'm one of those Tupac fanatics. I was really deep into the conspiracy theories and what have you back in the day, the 7 days, 7 years.
So that's your OSINT start, finding conspiracy theories on
100%.
Old
I
forums.
thought we had to address that before we moved on.
100%. And that's I sort of empathize with teenagers who are fully, lost in today's conspiracies, but I hope they're gonna get over it very, very soon and just grow up.
Wow. But you followed your curiosity, right? And that led you to dig deeper, debunk certain things, look for misinformation or disinformation, and then now you're making money out of it. That's
the Illuminati and all of that.
Yeah, of course. So if you don't know Amine, he is on Twitter. I'm showing his Twitter handle right here. And of course, we'll put it into the show notes as well. And he has a pinned link here to that really interesting article about his research that he was just talking about migration and these videos and blog posts that people were sharing. So thank you for being on the show, Amine. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Stick around. We've got some more to talk about here, things in the news.
Sounds good.
Excellent. So with that, let's get back and talk about the news. And the first thing that we need to do is, Nix, tell us what this document is right here.
This document is it's a collection of all our tools and resources and videos and blog posts that we put together over the past couple of years. basically, one of the purposes of OSINT Curious is to equip the OSINT community with the best resources that they can possibly access. And the last few months, we've spent updating it and putting all our tutorials in there, and they're organized by themes. So if you want to know how to do something on Facebook, there's a section on social media. If you want to learn about geolocation, there's a section there. All kinds of stuff. And we keep adding to it as we produce more content. But it's like a one-stop shop for everything you might want to find out.
Well, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing to put into organize things. It's not just, a list of things. It's well organized and sorted, much like this is. I think Lorand put this in the list of things to talk about today. This is Bellingcat's document on their online investigation toolkit. It's a good, and again, we'll put all of these things into the show notes, but it's essentially a Google Doc, and they have, or a Google Sheet. And they have their list of resources on this. Now, we also were talking a little bit about disinformation earlier, and we have a couple of articles over the past 2 weeks that have come out, or pieces of data that have come out. Media manipulation. And Matthias, were you the one that was talking about this, or was it Lorand?
That was Lorand.
It was, okay. Lorand, the mediamanipulation.org site.
Yeah, it's basically a really great, it's a new resource that kind of like compiles interesting case studies and also other resources linked to media manipulation. And because mismal and disinformation is currently a big topic. And I think this is one of the reasons why they put it together. And I think this is great for investigators who are interested in these topics to just dive in and look at how professionals, how journalists and other experts in this area work to debunk different stories. And even I think the tool section or the methods and everything is very interesting, and you might find something also for your cases. So definitely check it out.
Excellent. And let's while we're talking about this, we have to talk about a previous guest of ours, Jane Litvinenko, who has this really great YouTube video out now on verifying images and videos, mostly for disinformation, misinformation. Have you seen this one, Lorand?
Yes, exactly. So I came across this one, I can't remember where, on Reddit or somewhere. And this is basically a really good explainer video by Jane Litvinenko on how to verify images and videos. And I believe this is part of a course that she was also teaching on. And I think in one of our past OSINT Curious sessions, we were talking about this session that was free for journalists. And in this module too, she talks about verifying images and videos. So also really cool.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Now, if we're talking about celebrities, talking about geolocation, we got to talk about this article that came out this past week. I know, TerBush, you're looking at this like, come on, do we really have to bring the Kardashians into
I saw this. The person that did this did some decent work. I'm not going to hate on that.
Yep. Yeah, this was another one of those, where are they? Where did they go? Sometimes there's these OSINT case studies that people will look and say, let's see if we can figure out where this person went. So here we have a person named Vicky that wrote, and essentially, I like it because it's very entertaining read. She was trying to figure out where Kim Kardashian took her family and people on a trip, and she goes through and analyzes the image logos, and then figures out where planes went, and then is matching images from one of the Kardashians that's being posted. Is very entertaining read and interesting, shows a lot of the techniques that we've all talked about.
I think another important point here is also the whole OPSEC factor. So this is something that I can show my daughter and I can say, hey, if you continue on social media like this, people can track you, people can stalk you. So it's also a good case study, to make people more OPSEC aware.
Absolutely. Yeah. Agreed. 100%.
Yeah, when your daughter rents that private 747 jet and goes off to a private island, she shouldn't be. Well, it also speaks to something that we've all talked about, right? Is that there's always one person within a group that is going to be the one that is breaking OPSEC, is sharing those things. You could have the best operational security in the world and not on social media at all, but your mother, father, sister, brother, son, daughter, daughter's friend, son's friend, whatever, is going to be blabbing about the cool whatever. And
kind of brings us back to the conspiracy theories, right? Like how hard it is to actually get a group of people to not divulge some secret about something, right?
Yep, absolutely. Hey, Matthias, I think you were the one that posted about this screen translator.
Yeah, it's basically a pretty neat guide on how to use this specific screen translator, or basically it's an OCR plugin that is running with a very powerful backend, which is the Tesseract OCR software. Mm-hmm. So using this will enable you to basically OCR images in multiple languages, also some of the more exotic languages out there using different types of writing, so Cyrillic and things like that. And there are multiple tools out there, but I just like this article because it was a nice walkthrough on how you can use it and what you can do. And I do think that a lot of the stuff that we do will end up in basically foreign language internet. So having a tool like this able to process that and OCR that is very useful.
Yeah. And Tesseract OCR is free. I mean, but it's command line based, and it looks like this is that GUI that sits in front of it that allows people to use it quite simply, right? Very good. Now going to Lorand, I think this was your article, or is this Matthias? You still?
Yeah, that was me again.
Yep.
Nice article. The only thing that I wanted to point out here was actually the tools to compare text. So okay. If you are looking into a company, for example, and you might want to figure out if they're linked to some other company and you compare the two web pages, for example, their terms of service or things like that, there are certain tools that are listed here where you can just compare text, which is quite useful to actually figure out if these two might be linked to each other based on the wording that they used. So there are, I think, 3 tools in there, and I remember Kirby talked about this in sometime at the beginning of the year. I just wanted to point this out again, that this is also, a niche topic in OSINT, which might be helpful next to doing like domain research and a proper due diligence with company databases. Just look into something like this, and you also might find similarities between people, between companies, based on what they write.
Yeah, and this is by Jan, who's a previous guest of ours and really great person that publishes things in OSINT. The article is called How to Find Out Who Owns My Data. And again, one of the things that a lot of us do in the OSINT world is we take one piece of data, whether it's text on a website or something else, and try to find out where it came from, where are other places where that's being shared, using these proofing tools, these plagiarism checkers. Easy way to do that. All right, and Matthias, this one, I think you got a shout out in, right? This tracking evil corpse cars.
Yeah, this is from Curtis. I had him in one of my OSINT classes a while back. Really, really skilled guy. Learned a lot from him as well. And he basically just, looked into vehicles, something that I like to do, this time in Russia, and found out that certain Russian cyber criminals use a certain number plate and a license plate, and then he just went looking for them. So started off with the license plate numbers, then switched to social media, and it's a very interesting story about the whole Evil Corp gang, which caused some ruckus during this year. So very simple OSINT techniques, but combined getting to a very powerful result.
Absolutely. And since more and more of the sites out there that are doing the OCR, the object character recognition, sometimes we can just search for those license plate numbers. So I think in here, Curtis mentions that he figured out the pattern that they use this BOP and then 777 in the license plates, as you can see here. Going to Facebook and just typing that in may yield some really good results as well. So this is a really neat article. And phone numbers and investigations. Matthias?
Another good article, because this is not US centric. So most of the OSINT stuff we find nowadays is really US centric because you have a lot of data sources. And I love this article from SecJuice because they look at a South African phone number and kind of dissect that and show different techniques on how to figure out who's behind it. Starting out with like the ITU numbering plan. So how is a phone number built up? What's the country code? What's the regional code? And then just actually at the end, also just Googling it or using other techniques to find out who's behind it. And then one of the things that might work in some countries, a so-called HLR lookup to see if a mobile phone number is actually active or not, or maybe roaming in some other country. So something really, really interesting that is not US centric and that could be used for phone number research in other companies, other countries as well.
Terrific. Yeah, this one I was perusing, and there's so many great resources for looking for international information about phone numbers in the SecJuice article. So well done to SecJuice. Nix, we just today published one of your 10-minute tips, and this is the first part of a series.
It is, yeah. So I put together a tutorial about image geolocation, because it's kind of become quite a popular thing in OSINT when people like Bellingcat have done it really successfully. And there's quiz time as well, which is very popular, and people want to know how can you geolocate an image. This tutorial is the first one, and it's probably the simplest way to do an image geolocation, which is by getting the EXIF data from an image. It's really straightforward. There's a 10-minute tip video to go with it, which will talk you through how to extract EXIF data. And there's a blog post too. And although EXIF data is fun and it's very easy, it's also quite rare. So the next couple of tutorials will look at how to geolocate stuff when there isn't EXIF data, but those are in the pipeline.
Nice. And that's one of your main skills. I mean, not one of your main skills, but that's one of the skills that that's what you're known for, right? I mean, on Twitter with the quiz times and stuff, you are usually one of the first people to go, that's right here, right?
Yeah, it's something I did for a long time in my previous line of work, mostly trying to find victims of sex abuse and things like that. I then translating those skills to other areas. But yeah, so it's quite fun too. It's like some people like crosswords, I like geolocating stuff.
Nice.
I think this is a subject that, even I don't do a lot with imagery analysis, but every once in a while you come across it. Amine had a story about identifying something from the background, right? This is something that we all probably end up in the OSINT world doing at some point or another. So it's great stuff to know.
Yeah, I mean, didn't you have a story that you want to tell us about some work that you did with Facebook? Was it Facebook? Oh, you're muted, sir.
Okay. No, it wasn't actually Facebook, but it's
Okay.
it was about trying to understand. There was basically cracking a sock puppeting case in real life, not your online sock puppeting, but corporate entity using a number of NGOs in order to stage a competitive intelligence operation against a business entity. And it was actually cracked, literally cracked, because one of the individuals had a whole, the whole operation explained behind them, the whole operation, with arrows and what have you. And it's just like, there you go. It's not just speculation, that's real.
That's something you only see in movies, right? Like behind somebody's
True
like
story.
the entire master
Story.
plan.
The true story. They use codes. I mean, that's the thing. They use codes in trying to describe a little bit some of those actions. But if you're familiar with your client's issues, you get to understand that that's actually what it is about. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of image analysis is extremely, extremely, extremely useful, actually.
That's incredible. Well, if you notice it though, I mean, how many times have you watched a video and you're just listening to in the background, or you're just trying to get the gist and highlights, versus giving it eyes on and focused attention and starting to notice things? I think that's the biggest difference from doing just OSINT and following things. For doing things just as a hobby and doing things professionally. With professionally, I'm looking at those videos, trying to pull everything out, sometimes going frame by frame to look at interesting stuff versus just letting it play and wash over me. Yeah.
Well, that subject also touches on, earlier we were talking about AI, where, a human is going to pick that thing up. And if you are processing that with some sort of automated thing, you might never see it,
Unless that AI can pick out strings going from one push pin to another, right? Yeah, exactly.
By the way, speaking of AI and image recognition, there was a technology used in soccer, or football as we Europeans call it, which was supposed to track the ball, and it ended up tracking a bald linesman. Yep. So basically the people could not see the game, but just saw the linesman running around all the time.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. Oops. They're going to make him paint his head next time. Watch it. All right, so we have a couple of other things. One was a little disappointing, that the Recording Industry Association of America essentially submitted a copyright infringement or something. They issued a takedown request to Microsoft to remove a YouTube downloader extension application from GitHub. Now that Microsoft owns GitHub, and Microsoft did it, Microsoft not only deleted this project, the YouTube DL project, but all of the people that had forked it into their own repositories, removed them all too. But it wasn't that big of a problem for us. This is one of the biggest lessons that I've learned in the world of OSINT and cyber, is that if you just wait a little bit, people will figure out other ways to share that same product. So it might not be on YouTube, on GitHub anymore, but somebody actually bought the youtube-dl.org domain, and they're sharing the YouTube downloader there. So really nice. Mr. Bodo, can you tell us about your blog post here?
Yeah, exactly. So I wrote a blog post last week. It's on social media search strategies. And here what I try to do is to just break down and come up with a kind of like methodology to explain, first of all, the history and of importance of social media, but then also explain how you can find information on social media. And I look at 3 different ways. So the first one is looking at social search engines, social media search engines, and then the platform itself. Then I provide a couple of links to some other interesting blog posts and some examples. And yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, I love seeing when you post these great images and the Google Dorks that you're using, those advanced Google queries that you're using to pull up the content. Really helpful for people that are learning how to use these tools. So well done. And Lorand, you wanted to talk about this Christina Licati article video, right? Video?
Yes.
Blog post.
Yeah, blog post. So this is what I came across today, and it's a really great read by Christina, and also I think Samuel is also a co-author, because it's on Samuel's or OSINT Geek's blog.
OSINT Geek, yeah.
And they basically make an argument for why you should combine the intelligence disciplines, because we used to think that from your point of view that your discipline in which you're in, so in our case it's OSINT, it's the best. But here they also talk about the crime or cybercrime is also evolving, so we also have to adapt. And they argue for combining those 3 disciplines, in this case, the human, SOCMINT, and OSINT. And it's really, really good read. So I don't want to talk too much about it, but definitely have a look. Both are super experienced investigators, so it's always worth reading their stuff. It's really good.
And both of them are in our live audience today. So thank you to Christina and OSINT Geek for publishing that. And that combination of things, I don't know, do any of you other people have that same thought process that there's so much overlap now between the world of OSINT and human SOCMINT, even things like SIGINT, signals intelligence and all. I mean, with using Weigel's wireless networking stuff or Bluetooth things that are captured, we can tap into these other intelligence disciplines very easily to further our OSINT investigations. Have you found this too?
I think when possible, you should always go for an all-source approach. This all depends on the line of work you're in. Of course, there might be some restrictions that you might not be able to use certain intelligence collection types, but at the end of the day, you should use everything at your disposal, also kind of to counter-verify the information you get from one source, which is also a very important point.
Absolutely. I teach the OSINT class that Micah wrote for SANS, and I tell my students, don't just be an OSINT person. If you're doing an investigation, if you're doing research, use the tools at your disposal. If that means some sort of HUMINT and picking up the phone and talking to somebody, hey, do it.
Well, here's I guess a bigger question that I'll pose to you. Is it useful for us to still talk about OSINT, SOCMINT, IMINT, SIGINT, or should we call it just all source intelligence and put them all in there? Because coming up with those boundaries of, that's OSINT or that's SIGINT, and it puts up these sometimes artificial boundaries, walls, and places where people won't intellectually go to learn those skills.
I think you have definitely an overlap between these different intelligence disciplines. And I remember RAND Corporation, they wrote a really good report last year on 2nd generation open source intelligence. And they have this really good graphic that visualizes these different intelligence disciplines. And you can see an overlap with OSINT. So OSINT overlaps with HUMINT, SOCMINT, GeoINT, and everything else. SIGINT as well, because we can listen to radios, we can do this, and that. So it's pretty cool.
I would just caution on one thing, since in certain jurisdictions it becomes problematic. So keeping a certain level of distinction allows professionals to actually operate in that jurisdiction without any fears of being perceived as actually conducting any types of behavior that is not legal in those types of environments. So yeah, I mean, it becomes much more complicated when you're looking in other countries. But even here, I would say in where I am in Washington, D.C., when you use a term like human, it means something very specific within the D.C. community. And so, I don't know the solution to that, but I think it's keeping OSINT distinct is good for folks who operate or live in environments that are a little bit more complicated.
And I think we have to keep we have to distinguish between these different intelligence collection types, because those are different people with different skill sets doing this. You're not going to have a one-man army that is all-in-one and also source investigator. You're always going to have a team of people, and everyone brings their skill set to the table. So, for example, in that case, you'd have Christina doing the human part, you'd have Samli doing the OSINT part, and then they team together for SOCMINT. And it's the same for most of us. I mean, some of us are good in some parts of OSINT, some of us are good in other parts of OSINT, and it's the same way with these other collection types as well.
Are you saying I don't have to know everything about all the disciplines?
We're getting too old for that, Micah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Gumshoe.
Started by talking about the 90s, so.
Yeah.
I think these distinctions serve a purpose, definitely. There is some overlap. There always has been. There always will be. You need to understand, though, there are different methods of collection, different ways to analyze data, too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, thanks for the discussion, everybody. Nix, you wanted to talk about the host.io site?
Yeah, this was, I think people might be aware of another site owned by the same guy, which is ipinfo.io. It's a really good place to find out who owns an IP address, who the ISPs and so on. And they've expanded the project, and they brought out host.io 3 or 4 weeks ago. And it's kind of, for domain reconnaissance, it's really, really useful because it gets all the sort of key data points in one sort of query. So you put a domain in there, like you have OSINT Curious, you get the IP addresses, you get the DNS information, you get the Google Analytics tags, you get a bit of the server information. So all those things, when you are investigating a website that you might want to go through, you do it all with one click. There is an API as well, and if you have an API key for IP info, you can use it here too. You can get it with curl. There isn't a dedicated Python library for it yet, but I'm sure there will be, like there is for IP info too. But yeah, I liked it because it simplifies a lot of things in one place.
Simple and mostly free is awesome. That's a great juxtaposition of things. And Lorand, I think you posted in the SnapSync.
Yes, so this is also something I came across recently. I haven't done an in-depth test and evaluation of it, but it's kind of I think it works pretty similar. So you can also check out some more data on the domain, but also the email address as well. Then have a look at this. So yeah, it's also free.
Yeah, nice aggregator of information. Awesome. Well, we just want to mention one more thing before we pop off here. The Lizette, one of our other members who couldn't be here on the recording this week, she has a great blog post that just came out, what to do when a Facebook profile is private, which created a little bit of stir when it went out. There were some people that mentioned that, hey, if somebody's information is private, it should stay private, and this is going to lead to people doxing. But I think mostly the community said, people are going to use these things for good or evil, regardless of whether it's published. So it's important for the good guys good people to understand how to do use these techniques for finding and retrieving information when data is set to private. Well, we have come to the end of another show, everybody. I'd like to thank Amine for being on here and talking with us and sharing some amazing stories and expertise. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And we look forward to maybe having you back on at a later date just to, catch up, see what it's like.
All right.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Let's go around the horn here. Lorand, do you have anything that you want to mention as we're closing up here?
Yes, so I've got a new blog post coming out hopefully next week. It's just going through another round of review. It will be on constructing search queries that are super powerful and complex to find information in a ton of information on stuff. So hopefully it will be good.
Awesome. Nix.
No, I have nothing exciting planned this week other than being on Twitter as usual, where you'll find me at NixIntel.
Terrific. Gumshoe?
Have a couple of the Sec 47 OSINT classes coming up that I'm teaching. Also have the new course that I co-wrote with Dutch OSINT guy and David Mashburn. Our first class is a 2-day practical OSINT class is going to be in January. And then we have our OSINT Summit coming up in February as well, which is free. Everyone should check it out.
I will just dovetail with that. A free 2-day conference on OSINT virtual. And I just posted something to the chat. We'll put something in the show notes too. SANS is having a 2-day conference. We already have hundreds of people that have signed up all around the world. We are looking for people to present, of course, and the presentations can range anything from, hey, look at this cool thing that I noticed, like maybe something with the YouTube downloader or YouTube algorithm, to in-depth research. And we're even having some workshops this year, all 100% free for anybody that wants it. So we will put that in the show notes. Matthias, anything last words for you, sir?
I am actually quite busy together with OSINT Geek, putting the final polish on our German OSINT conference. We have like over 600 people that registered so far, so now we have to deliver. And that's going to be a stressful coming 3 weeks until that finally happens. But looking forward to it. That's
great. Well, we're looking forward to hearing some good German talks coming out of that. I hear you have some really great ones that are in the process. Amine? Any last words? Any places where people can find you? Any new things that are coming out that you want to talk about?
One last thing, I'm working on a OSINT manual, trying to mainstream it a little bit to non-English speaking audience, Arabic speaking audience. If anyone is listening and would like to be involved in this project, that would be I'd be very grateful. Please find me on my Twitter. My DMs are open. Just send me a message.
Excellent. And your Twitter's on screen right now in your name, but also we will have it linked in the show notes, and it'll be on many other places where we can link to you. So thank you for being on again. Thank you to our wonderful audience that's out here, been watching and been chatting with us during the event. And thank you for listening to us, everybody, no matter where you are. And there's just one last thing for us to do, everybody, and that's to tell everybody one thing. You know what that is, right? We're going to count it down this time because we haven't been doing it at the same time. Ready? On the count of 3. And it's 3, 2, 1, and then, okay, on the count of 3. On the count of 3, we'll do 1, 2, 3, and then it, right? 1, 2, 3. Stay OSINT curious. Thanks, everybody.